Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's virtual lecture and class. This lecture accompanies a quiz and a discussion board on Canvas, so be sure to check that out. Last week, we honed in on examining public health problems. We looked at thinking about root causes. We watched a nice video from Roy Rosen that asked a series of so whats to get at root causes and potential solutions. We also saw the framework for today's class and an outline of what is to come, namely working from a public health problem to developing a solution. And today we're going to talk about developing an evidence-based solution. Ultimately, we will put this all together in a grant format that you will have to add to your portfolio. So today we are going to be discussing reviewing the evidence, in particular looking at evidence-based public health, or EBPH, defined as the development, implementation, and evaluation of effective programs and policies in public health through the application of principles of scientific reasoning, including systematic uses of data and information systems and appropriate use of behavioral science theory and program planning models. In a future class, you will incorporate theory and program planning models in a more sophisticated fashion. For this class, we want you to be able to use the evidence not only to help define the problem, but to develop an implementation and evaluation plan for a suggested solution or approach. When we talk about evidence-based public health, it's important to note that only close to half of reported health programs are considered to be evidence-based. In fact, a whole field known as implementation science was created around this to make evidence-based practices routine. But the tricky thing in public health is that there are so many things that count as evidence. As described here, they can range from totally objective, such as systematic reviews and surveillance data, to totally subjective, like personal experience. And we don't discount any of it. In fact, many of the methods that we will review in consecutive classes will examine some of these objective methods like mapping and also subjective ones like qualitative research. And in traditional, mostly clinical public health, at the highest tip of this gold standard pyramid was a systematic review, when the results of primary research studies are summarized and either statistically combined, known often as a quantitative systematic review, or meta-analysis that uses statistical methods to combine the results of two or more studies. Or they can be not statistically combined, sometimes referred to as a qualitative systematic review. Right below that are multi-site and/or individual randomized controlled trials, referred to as RCTs, where places, people, and conditions are selected at random with a comparison group or a control. Take, for example, the greening of vacant lots as a way to reduce community violence, Brannis et al. In Philadelphia, a set of vacant lots were selected at random to renovate, or clean and green, by the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society. We see a lot of these in West Philly. And then the level of crime was observed, also other variables, through many methods in comparison to communities and nearby lots that weren't greened and cleaned. Now, this isn't a class of epidemiology or ethics, but it does raise some important points. One is that controlling in public health research may cause some ethical considerations, like why would you purposely improve one community and not another? It forces you to consider possibilities, such as in this intervention, to budget and then bring the controlled communities the intervention after the research is over. And the second point is, even with sensitive topics, having a random controlled experience, while not always obtainable, is still one gold standard to consider in terms of rigorous research methods. Now, as you go further down this pyramid, you see things like uncontrolled trials, any study that doesn't have a control group consisting of a unit, individual, community, treated and followed up over the same period of time. And next, single subject design. Rather than comparing groups of subjects, this design relies on comparison of treatment effects on a single subject or single group of subjects. An important aspect of this study is gathering pre-test information, often called baseline measure. It is important to measure the dependent variable or behavior prior to administering any treatment. And then you'll see correlational studies, frequently used to look at relationships between variables. For example, if you looked at state policies on gun laws and the prevalence of gun-related harms in those states, Weeb et al., you can suggest that there's a relationship between those two variables, but finding a correlation does not prove that one variable causes a change in another. So you have to be careful of language there. Correlation does not equal causation. And finally, the large category of anecdotal case reports or personal stories. Now, this pyramid has been used to denote levels of research evidence for some time and was particularly created for evidence-based medicine. But more recently in public health, we see a proposed shift to really look at a comprehensive systems approach that includes expert opinions, surveillance data, logic models, stakeholder preferences, simulation studies, program evaluations, etc. And this proposed shift is important when we think about addressing public health problems. As we will continue to discuss throughout the class, complex problems require complex solutions. And so often there is not one fix-it-all approach, but many as a part of a coordinated public health effort. And these evidence-based approaches come from a variety of sources, as we've discussed, not just systematic reviews or controlled trials. Take, for example, a topic we will be spending some considerable time on, gun violence, which has reached epidemic proportions. As you will learn when you examine the problem and its proposed solutions, despite the policymaker's dream that one policy will solve the crisis, there needs to be a comprehensive public health approach, including surveillance, funded research, common sense gun policies, such as requiring criminal background checks, resources for school and community-based prevention, and gun safety technology, such as trigger locks and safes. So, in public health, we love frameworks, and the LEAD or LEAD framework is a good one to employ when you were thinking of proposed strategies. This involves systematically, one, locating evidence, identifying and gathering the types of evidence that are potentially relevant to the questions that we will ask, evaluating the evidence and applying the standards of quality as relevant to different types of evidence that we've just discussed, assembling this evidence, selecting and summarizing relevant evidence, according to considerations, and we'll talk about organizing that, and then finally informing decisions. So this framework we will go through and use and what you can use in many decision-making processes. And when we talk about evidence, which is the first step, we can think of it in three very broad ways. Existing evidence, like all of the sources we previously discussed, from controlled trials to case histories and stories. Second, to creating your own data. In this class, while we will be relying on existing evidence, keep in mind some of the methods you've come across, whether it's in lecture or reading, to create your own data. This is something you might come back to and do in your capstone project. And finally, evaluating programs is another way and another tool to generate data or evidence. So with that said, there are certain steps you can take to search the literature or existing evidence, which you will do on an upcoming assignment. This starts with determining the problem, which we are doing now, and also considering defining a question. You might be looking at the problem of, let's use our same example of gun violence. but that may lend a very broad search. You can refine your search by defining a question such as, what have effective strategies been at the state level? Or what is the prevalence of gun violence among youth? From your problem and question, you then select sources that you will use, such as the internet and library system, and then work to identify key concepts and terms for your search. Most peer-reviewed research is categorized by concepts and key terms in a mesh system, which we will discover a bit later. So it's important for you to consider and document what your key concepts and terms will be related to your problem or question. Step 4 and 5 are conducting the search and narrowing documents to review. And while you're conducting the search, you can narrow and select your documents by selecting certain date ranges in the literature, different methods or types of study, an age range, or other variables. And this is all easily done electronically. Step 6 and 7 has you abstracting relevant information in a table of sorts so you can compare across and have this information in an easy format, like we have you do in the evidence review assignment. And lastly, summarizing and applying to your review. This is the gift we bring in our workforce, our MPH. That's not necessarily something that everyone does, but you will do this, you will learn to do this, and this will be routine in any of your research or your practice. So great data resources, big picture, are listed here, and you'll have these slides. And then there's a few we've also posted for getting local and specific. So you will have these slides and more on Canvas. And in particular, another slide set you will have in Canvas is one from our fabulous librarian, Sherry Morgan. Sherry put together some great information on searching databases that are available with your pen key through the library system, and also some resources for searching the gray literature that aren't always in these databases. And we're also strongly recommending that every single student meet with Sherry to review their literature review. It will only enhance it, and you'll meet her because I'm sure you'll want to use her as a resource again, and her contact information is on the first and last slide. So the best place to start and a good website to know is the guides.library.upenn.edu/public health. And this is a guide developed by Sherry and other librarians for use specifically searching databases in public health. You will find this extremely useful. Please go back to it. The next set of slides reviews some basics around using Boolean search terms like or, and not, which you should familiarize yourself with and use. Sherry goes through an example PubMed Plus search or advanced search, where you take your question, and we've talked about those, and some of the key concepts and terms that you've already thought about. And you can specifically incorporate mesh terms, which we'll talk about in a second, your keywords and any filters you might have, such as age range or date range, and you put it all together. And she takes you through an example on all of those in her slides. There's lots of different iterations of words and combinations of words using and or not, and you can merge all of these together. You should also document your search and use the mesh database if this is something you haven't used before. Basically, the mesh database categorizes search terms and keywords in a hierarchical system. You can see an example hierarchy here, and basically the hierarchy allows this PubMed search term of a broader term to include the narrower term in all branches automatically. So if this sounds complicated, there's a lot of YouTube tutorials on the library website at Penn, but also strongly advise that you meet with Sherry Morgan to maximize the potential of this great resource. A few more things I wanted to point out. One is documenting your search terms and the different sources you used. You can see a structure here with an example. Also, managing your citations and saving them as you go along. You can use this as a starting point to make sure you don't duplicate and to refine your search, to decide which articles to use, and to start your bibliography. The gray literature is something we're encouraging you to use. There's a lot of different sources and ways to search the literature, including databases such as Joanna Briggs database, which has a lot of white papers. You can see an example here, or the Center for Evidence-Based Practice, and internet searches and mining government and specialty organization websites are always good sources. When you're looking for specific authors or publications, Scopus is a great search tool, or Web of Science, or a Google Scholar even. Google is also trained to use the Boolean search terms or and not, so you can use them there as well. And remember, when using Google, it remembers your history, so always review more than the first page of results. And if you're interested in clinical trials, there's various websites from the government, National Library of Medicine, that you can use to help refine your search. So that's just a quick sampling of some of the slides that Sherry left and some of the resources available at Penn, and relisting Sherry's contact information here. In a consecutive class, we will be narrowing down topics and selecting a topic for you to start by doing a literature review and putting it into a table that looks something like this. Here are examples here, so be sure to familiarize with this assignment, and we will pick it up on week 5 when we do qualitative research and use the nominal group technique to pick our topics. So you can start thinking about what topics you would be interested in reviewing the problem and identifying a solution to work through class. So next week, I'll talk a little bit more about the upcoming community forum assignment, and we'll touch upon community collaboration to address public health issues. Look forward to seeing you then. Don't forget to take the quiz and add to the discussion board, and have a great week.